Yo dude, what's up? Welcome back to another video, and today I'm going to show you how to paint this Blood Axe war boss with an albino skin tone. Let's get to it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is going to work on the metal, and this is a trick that I quite like using. We're taking some Vallejo Model Air Metallic Black, and we're going to hit every single part of the model that's going to be a silver-ish metal with this. Even did the axe head with this, which at the start of the model I was planning on painting silver, but now, obviously as you've seen the photos, we're going to change that to red. Once that's down, work in some gunmetal and just get your volumetric highlights. So for a lot of people, they'll know this as a zenithal style highlight, where your highlights are coming down from above. Essentially what I really want to do is just bring out some of the shapes in all of the metal we've got here. And again, you can see we still highlighted the axe. We still hadn't made up our mind to paint that red just yet. Keep working this in until you've got some nice bright introduction to what can be our final highlight, and that is some scale color speed metal. This is a paint I recommend to everybody. It makes making true metallic metal really easy because it's almost metallic white. This, by the time we've done this, is the end of airbrushing the metal, and I think it looks quite cool. We've got some nice dark colors from underneath the model. And then as we look at the top of the model, we've got some super bright colors. This is giving us a good range on our metallics. Now we're going to airbrush all of the green, but there's a step that we do in between that which makes all of this super easy and saves you a load of time. Take some Caliban green and just block in all the areas that we're going to end up painting green. Now by doing this, you don't need to get a thick coat down, you don't need to get a smooth coat down, you don't even need to get a pretty coat of paint down, to be honest. All you need to do is block in all of the areas and pay attention to the edges where they would meet the silver. Once that's done, it means that we've got something we can use as a basis to smooth out with the airbrush. This is a technique I've been using for a long time, and as a commission painter, this is one of those things that you see me do that just speed up commissions. It's a way of making sure that I can get everything done in the quickest way without sacrificing quality. Now some of you might be thinking, Jay, hang on a minute, I can't airbrush quite that well. I'm going to get some of this green on the silver, and don't worry, I do too, so I'll show you how to fix that in a bit. But all you can do is use things like your thumb or a scrap of paper to just block off certain parts of the model. Think about changing the angle of your airbrush and the Mini itself to ensure that your overspray's got less chance of hitting those areas of the Mini. Start working up some highlights. We're using some Castellan green mixed in with our Caliban green. We're starting to build up some volumetric highlights. Again, that just means bringing out the overall shape of the model. Nothing really fancy here. And just keep your highlights going. Again, try and avoid the overspray as and when you can. But remember, I am going to show you how to fix that in a short while. Keep working your highlights up. The first one looks pretty good, but we need to go a little bit further, and so we just use some straight up Castellan green for our next highlight and go back hitting all of the same areas. As you can see here, we focused the tutorial bit on the glove, so we're bringing our highlight in down towards the knuckles of the glove to really emphasize that point. These are the things that are closest to you, the viewer, on the model. It makes sense that the highlight goes there. It draws your attention to that focal point. I've also done the top of his box that he kind of lives in. I guess he's welded into this, so lives in probably is about the right kind of explanation for this gargantuan creature. But we need to go somewhere else with the highlights now. Now, if you add yellow to green, it makes it really vibrant. If you add bone to things, it kind of desaturates it. We went with somewhere in the middle and got some Xandri dust, and it gives us something that is a nice bright finish to our green without being too like neon and jumping out at you. I think this was kind of important for where we needed to be. Now I'll show you how to correct all the overspray in a second, but for now we're going to go on with base coating the rest of the Mini just to get those bits done, and then we'll correct all that overspray. Once all that's done, it's time to start getting down all of our red. Now I always start my red with a mixture of Khador Red and Thamar Black, usually 3 or 4 to 1. It gives you a really good base coat that goes down quite easily over pretty much anything. For the larger areas like the axe blade, I did have to do 2 coats. A, it was going over silver, and B, it's quite a large flat area. We don't want any really bad brush strokes happening there. I could have used the same technique to be used for the armor with the airbrush to smooth things out, but for a lot of this it's kind of small spaces and I didn't want to do that. We then use some Umbral Umber thinned ever so slightly with water to do all of the base coats on any of the leather work, so the straps, the axe handle, all that kind of thing. and then we tidied up the overspray with the green on the silver, but just taking some very thin speed metal and just carefully brushing that on here and there where we need to. If you keep this nice and thin, you'll be able to build gradients similar to how you use the airbrush for it, and it won't look like you've done a lot of brush work to tidy up your overspray. Just go on nice and thin, add a couple of coats where you need to, and smooth out everything. I also took an opportunity at this point to add a few strikes of battle damage and roughen up the surface a little bit, knowing that when it came to doing the highlights in the washes section later on, that would all work in my favour. Okay, so let's talk about the skin just for a moment. I wanted to create an albino orc because you don't see it very often, and I figured this particular model would be quite cool. We've already got some dark green to sort of bland, drab green armour, and didn't really want to just compete with that with just a brighter green, so doing something with very, very pale skin tones really appealed to me. Now there's a couple of ways that you could have gone about this. You could have started with a grey in the shadows of the skin and worked up to white, and then maybe if you'd wanted to, washed back in some colour into the recesses. But I wanted to start with something already quite dark to work out where my sort of maximum shadows would be, knowing that I could add to them later on if I chose to. Essentially what we did was took a mix of Bugman's Glow and Murderous Magenta from P3 and created a powerful pink sort of colour. I will admit that as soon as we'd finished this base coat, the model was basically Kang from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but that's fine. So once that's done, we need to start working up our highlights. Now I've added Menoth White Highlight, which is a very bright bone colour to this. Didn't want to desaturate it, so only add a very small amount at a time, and then just focus on anything to begin with that isn't a recess. So I went all the way around the model. I painted everything that wasn't the darkest crevice on the Mini. Now it's important to use very thin paint here. We're going to start adding in many layers of this. We start working up a lot of the volumes using 2 or 3 passes of the same colour before we move on to the next. So for instance, in the bicep areas, and especially on the head, which everything's obviously quite big and pale and fleshy, just sort of put on a little bit of a coat at a time, and then after that's dry, maybe go back and use the same coat of paint, just bring more of it up. As soon as you're done with that, add in more Menoth White Highlight, again just a little bit at a time, and keep working those volumes. So here you see me paying more attention to the hand than you might want to see in a video. This is to illustrate, for instance, the inside of the hand towards the palm, where all of those little areas are. We want to make sure we get all the detail, and we want to keep our recesses very small. Quite often the mistake I see made when people are painting flesh is that they want to have big contrast between the recesses and the bits that are in the light. And that's fine, you should want that. But the issue is that you end up with quite thick lines of contrast and very sort of blocky looking highlights, and that's really not what you want. So keep the contrast, the shadow areas very thin all over the model. This is important on any areas of like big muscle like the arms for this guy, and certainly around the face. Keep building the highlights up by adding more and more Menoth White Highlight and keeping those highlights thin. Remember, you can go back several times with the same highlight mix to complete a highlight to really smooth out any of those transitions. And here you can see me doing that on the bicep, working up towards the top of the bicep to give it a volumetric highlight, so lights towards the top to help round out the shape. And we can keep doing that again and again with the same paint to create a nice smooth look to it. On the face, especially at this point in time, we're trying to recreate those bright highlights towards the front while still keeping some of the pink in now. The face has got to be the brightest point on the Mini because we want this to be our focal point, and it's very important that that is the case. It's going to be easy to spot anyway because it's going to be super bright next to all the dark green, but we do want to make sure that the eyes are drawn to the face and not just to the skin in general, so that receives more highlights. At the very last stages, you start to really bring out the shape of the face and the expression. So here start to use smaller highlights and trace in lines around the eyes, the mouth, and so on to really draw the attention towards those eyes. Here you can see that I'm just bringing tiny little highlights in here and there to really achieve that effect. That's basically it for the skin. So after the skin was done, it was time to start finishing up the base coat. So use some Umber and some Murderous Magenta to get the tongue and the teeth and all of that sort of stuff done and blocked in. Otherwise, I was pretty happy with the way this guy was going so far. Everything looks about right for a blood axe. We just now need to start getting all the detail and definition back in. When you're using the airbrush, it kind of gives everything the same value all over. Even once you've added in your volumetric highlights, it starts to keep everything about the same level of high, and you need to get the lows back in. So for the green, we use some military shader from Army Painter, and over some of the areas like this one, we just sort of put it on everywhere. For other areas, we just outlined the areas that needed the shade so we didn't lose the big volumes on our airbrush work. So here's where we're going to do something kind of interesting with washes. Basically, we're going to wet blend on the model and allow the washes to mingle together. We're starting off with some dark tone, which can be quite thick, so thin it down a fair bit and then slap it on all the areas that you want it to be used on. We're just going to work on one area at a time though, because obviously we want a wet blend, we don't want it to start drying as soon as it hits the mini, and obviously with acrylic washes, that's one of the things that will happen. Make sure you pick up any pools of wash that are left on the model. We don't want any of that happening at all. Once you've got one area down and ready to go, we're going to take some strong tone, which is a brown wash from Army Painter. Again, thin that right down and just dot this on the model all over. Again, going to work with just one element at a time, and don't overdo this. We don't want the model to be brown, we want the model to be mottled. So some brown, some black on this finished form. Once that's done, don't forget to go back and just double check there are no pools of wash that you've missed. After all, this will dry with gravity and drain down the model, so just be sure of that. Once it's dry, you can see we've got quite a lot of interest on the model just from this simple process. It hasn't taken any real work, let's be fair now, and we've got lots of areas of metal with just that two-tone, slightly dirty, ever so slightly grubby look to it, which would be perfect for that forest environment. You've got things like the heavy stubber as well. You can see we've got lines of that dirt that look very, very natural. And this was not using any posh products or anything. This was just your basic acrylic washes. Now I decided we needed to add in a tiger stripe camo to this guy. And I think I saw it sometime in the 90s in a white dwarf somewhere. So to add in the tiger stripes, make sure the edges aren't particularly straight. But remember, it's not a lightning bolt. So just paint them with a little bit of a wavy line to the outside, using the same mixture of red and black we used right at the start of the red to get everything blocked in nicely. And as well as doing it on the top of the carapace he's got here, we'll do it on the elbow pads and on the little bit of cloth he's got down at the bottom. I wanted to find a way to separate that from his trousers without it being too different. I wanted it to stay uniform green, so just a few tiger stripes on there helped as well. Overall, this doesn't take very long to do and adds quite a lot to the mini for the sake of just a few brush strokes. So once all your base coats are dry, it's time to start adding some highlights to your red. And red's one of those things that you can take your time over painting to make look really, really good, or you can rush it and it tends to look a little bit scrappy. So definitely worth putting the time and investment and effort into this. Every single step of the highlight process here I've done in a little bit like the skin, where we've put down one coat of paint that's been quite thin and then followed up with another one to help finish off the transition into that colour. So here we've added a bit more K-Dial red to our mix, we've then added that on to all of our highlights quite thinly, and we've gone back over the same coat of paint, just a little bit more of it to build up the opacity in those layers. You can see that for things like the skull that we started to work up on right now with the K-Dial red, you've gone with more of a volumetric style of highlights. So all that really means, and we've used that term several times in this video, is taking the shape of it and making the shape look more 3D. That's kind of a dumbed down version of the explanation, to be honest, but it's close enough. With things like your tiger stripes that we've got on top of this guy, we started off with an edge highlight around the outside, and we've shaded in most of the flat surface on there. At the end of the day, these I kind of want to look a little bit more cartoony than the rest of the model. I don't know why I decided to do it, other than the fact that I remember some vague kind of thing back in like the early 90s in White Dwarf perhaps, where Blood Axe Commandos had red tiger stripes for their camouflage, and so that's why it made it onto this model. Now when you're adding in the last highlight to the red, if you just add in a very small amount of Flash Kits yellow, it will really help. The last thing you want to do though is create something that looks orange. If you do, it's not going to read as red anymore. So just add in the very smallest amount and keep your highlights fairly small. Add in battle damage at the same time in doing this, so just a few little nicks and scratches here and there, that will go a long way, but keep it to a minimum. When you look at the mini, all of these areas should still, you have the sort of point of view, you look at them and you go, they are red, they're not orange. If you get that feeling, you've added way too much yellow in at this point, and that's not ideal. If you do though, don't worry, it's an easy fix. Just take some K-Dial red, turn it into a glaze, and glaze it back in over the top. Super simple. When it came time to highlight the green, I wanted to go with something that was somewhat desaturated. All of this armor looks a little bit drab, and if I'd mixed in yellow with the green, we would have ended up with something more sort of neon and more like a highlighter pen. So I figured that I had to go with a bone color mixed in with our Castellan green to continue getting that nice desaturated highlight. We used a little bit of the yellow tones from Xandriast earlier on. This just sort of builds on that a little bit and goes more towards the desaturated element of it. So here we added in a little bit of battle damage, hit our edge highlights in a very sort of cartoony fashion, which is just how I like to do it anyway. And by that I mean that you don't need to highlight everything. So instead of drawing boxes around things like you'd see on maybe the GW box art like the Heavy Metal team does, instead just put your highlights where you need them. Try and find some points where you can get the maximum contrast between your highlight and your shadow. So for instance, on the glove there, we made sure that we had some areas that were right next to where the wash was, which is our maximum shadow, and then some areas of that were nice and bright all around at the very front of the glove to draw your eye. For things like the top end of the miniature where we've got these tiger stripes, I decided I was going to add in some battle damage scratches just across those. And I figured that the tiger striping would be painted on the armor, so it would make sense for that to be chipped away by any of the green paint coming underneath it. So if you imagine the red paint was put on top, something scratched that off, you've got the exposed green paint underneath, I figured that would be the best place to put some highlighting. If you'd like to see me do more of an in-depth video on weathering, please comment below, and if I get enough interest in it, then maybe I'll think about doing it. Right, quick disclaimer before we get into the next part of the video. You're about to see the model with its base fully completed, and that was done for a Patreon video that went live last week. So if you want to see how that was done, do go and check out Patreon. You'll find a link to that just down below. You'll also find links to my Twitch channel down there, where recently we held a competition where we gave away £15,000 worth of hobby supplies, making it the biggest Warhammer giveaway ever. You'll find that link just below the subscribe button, which you should probably hit about now, maybe even give the video a cheeky thumbs up while you're down there to add it to your like list. Now on that stream I did say that if we hit our donation goal of £10,000, I would shave off the mohawk when somebody asked in the chat. And if you want to see that, we'll add it into the end of this video. So stay tuned for that. Some of you might have noticed this earlier on, but we did give the grot a little coating of Warboss green. It definitely needs more than one pass. We've just refreshed the skin by starting off with that before we do the highlights. So we're highlighting the skin for this guy exactly the same way we have pretty much every other element of the model, with those volumetric highlights. We just added in a little bit of flash gitch yellow at a time, and do keep it small, keep your paint nice and thin, and build the opacity every single time you go through until you're happy you've got a nice, bright, vibrant green. Now what we don't want is this guy to blend in with the base that we've got planned for the model, which obviously you see there is a lot of bright greens. We want this guy to stand out and be a little bit brighter in comparison to all of those things. So keep working your yellow up until you get to a point where you think, if I add in any more, he's going to look like a highlighter pen has had a go at him, and then start to desaturate it, but also build the brightness a little bit more with some Meneth White highlight. You've seen me use Meneth White highlight and base several times in this video. Those two are really good utility paints that are useful for practically everything you paint. Strongly suggest you picking those two up along with a few other things like that to really help boost what you can do with the paints that you already have. As you can see from the second highlight that we're putting down with this mix, we've just added a little bit more and we're keeping these highlights nice and small. We don't want to overdo it and switch this too far towards that kind of very pale colour. Just get the edges, bring attention to the eyes, the big nose, that sort of thing, and call it done. And as you can see, that's pretty much the entire model done. It's just a case of highlighting the leather. We want to keep this nice and desaturated. That's why we went with Umbral Umber to begin with, because it doesn't have a lot of red in it. It's very neutral brown. So use some more neutral brown in the way of Steel Legion Drab for a first couple of highlights, and then some Meneth White base as well, which is a nice bone colour to get the final highlights built up. Also try to get the highlights in a nice line down the very front edge of the axe haft. I think it gives it a nice look at that point and keeps the rest of it nice and dark. For our metallics, we used some speed metal and once again came in with some edge highlights. You can again add in little bits of battle damage here and there, but I didn't want to go too far on any of this because it would bring the brightness up quite a lot. We spent a lot of time working in the darker washes and that kind of dirty, grimy look to it earlier on, we don't want to ruin that by making it all nice and bright and shiny now. By the time we've done all this, I think the model looks pretty sick, and that base really gives it that nice jungle feel. I think that having the green for the armor and a little bit of red to help it stand out from that base works very, very well. And overall, I'm really impressed with the Blood Axe color scheme that we've got. I think had we not gone with the albino skin, the whole model would look like a green blob from a distance. So for me, it was very important having that contrast in there. Let me know what you think of this mini. Put some comments down below telling me what you did and didn't like about it. And don't forget to stay tuned. We're about to shave the mohawk off. I hope you enjoyed that, if nothing else. See you guys in a sec. Well, I said on stream that we'd do this, and we definitely reached the £10,000 mark, so it's time to shave off the mohawk. We've got our clippers. And don't worry, I won't make you listen to that awful noise. We'll just put some music on and speed through this, but here you go. Said I'd film it. Thank you very much to everyone that donated this weekend. You guys are absolutely wonderful, and I couldn't do what I do without you guys tuning into the stream, being Patreon supporters, and watching my videos here. So here's to you, you horrible group of bastards. There you go. No one can say I'm not a man of my word. Hopefully we'll see you in the streams and in the next video. For now though, this has been No Hawk Miniatures signing off. Peace out.